Does it work? Can you hear? Perfect. Before I start, I must say that when I first arrived here in Hamburg and I was greeted in the airport by the taxi driver with moi, I started thinking, did I even change the country? Because in Finland, in Finnish, you greet people with moi. So I studied German for 7 years. Sorry for not speaking German today. It's a little rusty, but they never told me that you can greet people with moin. Is it just Hamburg thing or just a Hamburg thing? Okay, then it probably makes sense. Any case, if you ever go to Finland, you can now at least know one word, moi. You can greet people with that one as well. Let's get into it. So today I'll be talking about indeed how we at Sievo are transforming the, let's say, typical definition, traditional definition of spend analytics and procurement analytics into more of an action generation engine. I know, a fancy word. How many of you are already familiar in some way or another with Sievo? Have you ever heard? A few. Okay, so then it's a great point to do a quick little introduction to who we are. Essentially, we are a spend analytics, procurement analytics software provider doing best of breed at that. So we are really focusing on the data side. We serve the largest enterprises across the world. We are industry agnostic, so we operate in FMCG, manufacturing, services, you name it. And that basically means that we process over 2% of the global gross domestic product in terms of the spend volumes on an annual basis. Think about it. That's a lot of data. And I will actually get into it a little bit later on why that is such a significant factor, especially in our latest development with our product. Secondly, we are very nicely recognized by the procurement tech analysts. We also work with many, let's say, top consultancies, which we are obviously very proud of. But ultimately, what we do is we help our clients to achieve better decisions, faster decisions, and more savings ultimately. Also, CO2 reduction, etc. I'll get to that later on. But today, what I want to talk about is this concept that we have at Sievo, or how do we see the data to action gap and what it actually means. And let's go into that. So what we argue is that analytics itself, the data, the dashboards, they have zero value. The value is actually in the actions that are driven from the data that you have. So in traditional sense, you may think that, you have some data and then you would really need to act upon it. Without acting upon the data, it's just nice graphs, nice business intelligence visuals, and you are not really making a difference, right? So if we think about the data to action gap and what it means to us is, well, as you can see, it's almost a screen wide. So you have data here, action there. And we need to start filling that gap in. The first step would typically be indeed the analytics. So you have the capability to analyze what has happened, why did it happen. Perhaps if you're lucky, you may have a guess on what will happen. So this is kind of the traditional view on how you would consider spend analytics, right? Again, a question to you guys. How many of you have something that looks like remotely like this at place in your organization for spend analytics? Okay, now I see more hands. Perfect. And indeed, I don't know if it's a little bit too small here, but traditionally you see spend analytics, you know how much are you spending, what different goods or services are you purchasing, who are the business units who are doing the purchases, and even who are you buying from? So who are your suppliers? And in itself, it's not bad. It's a good start. But what kind of happens after the analytics is that you need to do a lot of slicing, a lot of dicing to actually then analyze what should I do about the data. So you have millions, hundreds of millions of transactions, and then the procurement professionals need to start identifying how can I utilize this data to the maximum capacity. Ultimately, once you do this, you will reach some type of a decision, right? So Maybe you find that you have a long tail of suppliers. In the recent years, there has been some maverick purchasings. You need to start consolidating your purchases to those strategic suppliers that you really have a good partnership with. So again, it's not too bad. You noticed that from the data. You saw that you have increased the supplier base a lot in your category. So, it's a good start. However, the problem is that the world is changing fast. First and foremost, naturally, the procurement mandate has increased. It's not really a recent thing, but what we have seen in the past, let's say 5 years, procurement professionals are asked more in terms of course, savings, carbon reduction, risk management, etc. Obviously, the CPOs will every year be asking for more savings, and of course, they should be. Savings are super important. But secondly, also the data for AI. I know AI, you probably have heard of it a lot in this event. I won't make it all about AI, but obviously the data for AI has increased, and therefore the capabilities for what you can do with it have also increased and will increase at rapid pace. Finally, not only the technology, but also the regulation is changing. So, for instance, the German Supply Chain Act, I won't try to pronounce it in German. It was kind of a monster of a word where I heard it in here, but that's a good example of how the requirements for what you can do with the data or what you must do with the data are changing. And this takes us to the Sievo ambition. So what we are looking after and what we want to do for our clients is to facilitate the transformation from the analytics dashboards into more of an action generation engine. Now, again, I know it's kind of a fancy word, and in itself, it is probably pretty generic. However, in this presentation, I will be explaining to you how we are essentially bridging the gap between data and action with the action generation engine that we are developing and have developed at Sievo. Maybe some of you know this kind of a cliche where all the startups are saying that, if we need to introduce ourselves, we are saying that, okay, we are the Uber of this industry, or we are the Airbnb of that industry. It's a bit of a cliche, right? Even though we are not a startup, we are not that different. So I have some examples for you from applications that all of us know, and then draw some comparisons into how do we actually execute on similar use cases and similar technologies. Let's get into it. So, first and foremost, if we think about Netflix, most of you probably have used Netflix, and you know that Netflix is very good at recommending you the series or movies that you know are, let's say, relevant to you. So, you don't need to spend hours of browsing through hundreds or even thousands of different movies, genres, whatever, to really find the entertainment that you're looking for. And it's a great concept, right? What we do at Sievo is somewhat similar. So we offer an insight generation engine, which instead of forcing you to go through all of those dashboards, drilling, slicing and dicing through the data, provides the procurement professionals with the insights from the data, kind of readily digested. And I know it's a bit small there, but the point is that you no longer have the dashboards there, at least all alone. Instead, the system recommends you some actions that you should consider. I'll showcase a bit later on how that all comes together, but let's move to the next example. And the next example is Spotify. Spotify, again, I would believe is familiar to most of us. And Spotify, at least to me personally, is a very good, let's say, technology to know what I want to listen. So it really is good at personalization. So it creates you the today's playlist. That's actually the new feature that I just tried out like last week, where Spotify basically figured out that what I listen typically on a Sunday afternoon or so, and then it actually ended up being gym music, which I don't always listen, but otherwise a pretty good tool. And what we do at Sievo, again, we do something similar. So we offer a personalized homepage. So What it means is that as a procurement professional utilizing Sievo, you can access relevant information very, very quickly when you log on to Sievo. So for instance, your recommended insights, the savings initiatives that you have ongoing, any potential requests from your colleagues regarding to, for instance, data improvement in terms of reclassifications of the data, etc. Also, of course, not only personalized, but for instance, the news from the organization that the people want to share across the whole user base, so to say. Thirdly, I have 4 examples, so we are halfway through. We have Shopify. So what Shopify is very good at is utilizing the data from across the whole user base and then recognizing what you may want to do after you have done some certain purchase or introduced a item into your basket. And what Shopify essentially does is it references across all of their users, takes a look at, okay, if you bought sunglasses, maybe you also want to buy a bathing towel, maybe you're going to a beach. And it's a great feature again. Unless maybe if you're a shopaholic, then maybe it's a harmful feature, I don't know. It may not always be the best, but for me personally, I found it quite a genius, let's say, technology at least. You can appreciate that. What we do at Sievo, what we are actually looking into at the moment is utilizing the vast amount of data that we have, especially when it comes to offering supplier insights. So at Sievo, we process over 12 million of consolidated supplier entities, so meaning that we have a record of 12 million suppliers that are essentially shared across the whole Sievo data repository. And what this allows us to do is enable insights at scale, which are not only your internal data, but also data from essentially the market. So we'll take an example from Deutsche Post. If there's someone from Deutsche Post, this is just an illustration, so no worries. So we can see that from Deutsche Post, typically the payment terms would be 75 days. We can see a little bit of the, let's say, average payment behavior from the supplier, or actually towards the supplier, and then potentially some cash discounts, etc. So really kind of utilizing the community data to navigate potential insights and actions in terms of, in this case, improving on the working capital. On the very bottom of that illustration, you can also see that we are able to efficiently at scale also fetch necessary information in terms of, for instance, the SBTI, so science-based targets, I believe, which are then related to the sustainability regulation that I mentioned. Good. Then, 4th example. This is probably, again, no surprise to anyone. ChatGPT, LLMs, etc. So I won't say that we are buying too much into all of the hype, but what I must say is that there truly is some very lucrative and, let's say, exciting use cases in procurement analytics for large language models. And obviously, we all probably know what ChatGPT does and what it's good at. And then the applications from Sievo's perspective are somewhat of the same. So besides, obviously, the kind of data processing that you may have when it comes to feeding the LLM some data and then asking it to deliver some analysis on that. That's something that we actually support in Sievo. It is quite convenient, especially if you are not like the most experienced BI user. So again, what we want to make sure of is that all of the procurement professionals, regardless of their, let's say, data capabilities, are able to get the benefits from the data that you have, the spent data, right? And it not only does kind of the data crunching for you, it can also author, for instance, supplier negotiation emails, some suggestions at least. Obviously, typically you need to add the kind of personal touch there, especially if you're working with more of a strategic suppliers. So really let's say, useful and a handy tool, not really let's say, a tool that solves every single problem, but really can accelerate the work when it comes to data-driven decisions and actions. Good. Then, if we think about a little, how does all of that, what I showed you, influence the data-to-action gap that I was talking about earlier? Well, I would argue that it reduces the time and the human input required to arrive at the decision. So it can either be that the technology offers you the decision support, and at the very end, you still have the procurement professional who applies their context knowledge. So the data doesn't always tell the full story. You may have your supplier relationship that you have managed and something that is not evident from data. And ultimately, before arriving at decision, you need to actually assess the decision support or the recommendation that was provided by the Sievo system. We do believe that not all of the decisions require the human input, especially when you're operating in a supplier tail side of things. So the long tail of suppliers that are providing, let's say, minimal services and goods in terms of the volumes, etc. Obviously, even there, you may have some important suppliers. So not to say that the supplier tail is fully automatable, but we argue that we can make, let's say, hundreds, thousands of decisions automatically during the day, which would typically require, let's say, a full day for one decision by a human. So that's basically how we see this technology bridging the data-to-action gap in collaboration with the procurement professionals. Good. The only problem is that, as you can see from this graph, we still have the white space there. We still have the gap between data and action. The problem is that even if you have a decision, it doesn't yet move the needle, right? You decide that, okay, I will renegotiate my payment terms, or I will renegotiate the prices for these items with the supplier. But then typically, when it comes to analytic solutions, you just kind of leave it there, and then you head out to some other interface where you can manage that. And we are not super happy with that at Sievo. We want to make sure that the whole flow is something that you can actually manage through Sievo, because that just makes things way more convenient and fast for the users. And that essentially translates into the concept of data, insights, and action. What you saw there when I was going through the examples was the personalization, community intelligence, automated analysis through the large language models, ultimately leading to recommendations. And then what you have on the other end of the spectrum is the automated action. So it can be, for instance, starting a savings project to really communicate and track the impact that you are about to make with the decision that you have done. Or potentially a negotiation bot that you can trigger, an email that you can send to supplier. There are many different ways that you can act upon the insight that you get in Sievo. Now, before showcasing a little how that actually looks like, I want to just address the question, okay, why are we now redefining the concept of spend analytics? So what has really changed? Again, sorry to say, but it's indeed AI. And if we think about the kind of three, let's say, work buckets that you typically have in procurement, they are influencing, deciding, and executing. And the way we see it, influencing will still be very much human-driven. So this is engaging the suppliers, let's say, innovating with the teams, etc., really kind of facilitating all of the work that really goes into making change in the spend scope. And this is ultimately, of course, procurement is also human business, so this will remain. Decisions, as mentioned, they will be to some extent enhanced by AI, maybe in some context also automated by AI. And then executing, this is where we see that there is also huge potential to remove a lot of the, let's say, redundant manual work when it comes to carrying out the actions on the data and the information that you have. So essentially, how we see things is that two work buckets will be influenced by AI, and that's why we are now moving fast in this space. Good. I see that I have still 6 minutes left, so let's try to see a quick video of how all of this comes together. So this is indeed the Insights Hub. You can see that we have roughly, in this case, 1,500 different insights worth of 150 million euros of savings, which we can then act upon in different ways: negotiations, emails, initiatives, etc. The insights types themselves, so what kind of insights can we derive from the data? There's a vast amount of different stuff that we can do in terms of payment terms, prices, market index development, sustainability in terms of carbon reduction, etc. So really lots of opportunities for what kind of actions can we do. In this case, we can analyze payment term recommendation coming from the community data. And if we scroll down, we can see the system automatically list us the most lucrative, the most impactful insights that we can take a look at. In this case, we analyze from the insight that, okay, what is the system telling us? It's telling that with the supplier, we have net 30 days of payment terms. And the community data actually tells us that with this particular supplier, we would typically or should be able to get it up to somewhere around 50 net days. And this is basically why the system tells the user that, hey, if you were to negotiate with the payment terms, you could potentially achieve net 45 days of payment terms to achieve working capital improvement. So I will take it up. I will contact the supplier, and the system will also pre-author a template of what kind of an email I could send. So it will actually also ingest all of this data that we have to make the arguments on your behalf. Now, obviously, you still probably want to tailor it a bit, take into context and everything, but after you have decided that, okay, this is good, you can create a savings initiative. So this is basically something that you use then to communicate the actual impact of the decision and action that you have taken. In this case, we'll just fill in some information into our project, add some activities, etc. Ultimately arriving at a savings project that we can execute on together with the colleagues, maybe even the finance function, hopefully finance function, and then also link the savings back to the original initiative that we were looking at. So really closing the loop between getting an insight from the spent data, creating a savings initiative, and then ultimately communicating that back to the insight. That was the video. Maybe I should have done a voiceover beforehand. I felt like Eminem talking because I tried to be quite fast. Sorry for that. Something that I want to kind of now close the presentation with, and something that I want you to take away here, is that ultimately what we want to do with Sievo is more decisions faster by closing the data to action gap. Thank you. Dankeschön. I have 2 minutes for questions, so.
I join you for this, maybe on stage. I mean, quite an interesting topic. But Julius, maybe you can tell us, where do you believe fully automated actions make the most sense in procurement?
Right, yeah. So as said, we believe that not all the actions can be automated. We believe that especially the tail spend decisions can be automated. So, you know, for instance, negotiating payment terms with the tail suppliers where it's just humanly impossible to send out hundreds or thousands of emails to really try to make an impact in the tail spend portion. Now, when it comes to managing strategic suppliers, it's a different story, right?
Yes, it is. We have questions from Slido. I want to know, is Pascal here in this room? You are Pascal, so these questions are from you, yes? Okay, interesting. Okay, then maybe you can choose. We have only 1 minute left. Which question should I ask? The first, the second, or the third? The third. What makes your solution so special?
Yeah.
Quite challenging question.
No, it's a perfect question. I'm happy to answer. So what makes us really unique is the data that we process and the capabilities and opportunities that we get from the data. So you can think that, okay, you know, it's not that hard to build a Power BI dashboard doing spend analytics. But what you don't have is all of the reference data, the benchmark data that you can get with a solution like Sievo. So that's essentially what really is the key differentiator between kind of a do-it-yourself approach and a Spenolytics provider such as Sievo.
Okay, is the question answered? Okay. Yeah, I think so. So you are here the rest of the day too for questions?
Yes, booth C15.
Yeah? Okay, 3:15.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, perfect. So thank you so much for your insights,
Thank
Julius. And yeah, this is your applause.